Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. My name is Anna Palmer. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our second event in a two-part series, Investing in Small Business, in partnership with the American Investment Council. Today, I'm going to be joined on stage by Representative Stephen Horsford, the Democrat from Nevada, who's also a member of the Financial Services Committee. So we're going to get into news of the day. No shortage of speaker drama to talk about, the economy and private equity and small business. Afterwards, I'm going to be joined by Drew Maloney, who's the CEO of the American Investment Council, for a fireside chat. Big thank you to all of you joining us on the live stream. As always, you can find Punchbowl News on all social media at Punchbowl News, and we encourage you to share about this conversation. With that, I'm going to welcome the Congressman to the stage, Mr. Horsford. All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
All the way from Las Vegas.
If you were a betting man, we'll start with that.
I'm from Las Vegas, so I don't gamble much.
All right, we are going to start with some news of the day here, as we always do, to kind of center the conversation, what's happening in Washington. House Republicans still feel like they're in chaos. Today they are set once again to vote for who should be Speaker. It's unclear if any of the candidates can get to that magic number of 217. Do you think the Democrats should take action if Republicans can't secure a speaker on their own? And do you support some of your fellow members who say they're going to sit this out to try to get potentially a Mr. Emmer into that speaker role?
Well, good morning. It is great to be here. Thank you to Punchbowl News for having me. I'll just say this. We are united in the House Democratic Caucus behind one thing, and that's making Hakeem Jeffries the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. It's clear that there's disarray on the other side of the aisle, and we're now into week 3 of the House being without a speaker for the first time in history. And so it's clear that they don't have the votes. And while I believe that 5 of them could break ranks and join us, since we're unified, the best option at this point is a bipartisan path forward, which Leader Jeffries has offered both privately and publicly, and it's the only way, in my opinion, that we're going to reach agreement and appoint someone who meets the criteria to actually lead in this moment of both domestic and international importance.
I want to shift gears a little bit on financial services. You are a member of the Financial Services Committee. Over the past 3 weeks, Patrick McHenry has served as Speaker pro tem, and very little has gotten done at the committee level. How concerned are you as a member of that panel if it ends up having to be Mr. McHenry in that Speaker role for a certain amount of time, that anything's going to get done in the panel, and what do you hope actually gets accomplished before the end of the year?
Well, I actually have high regard for Chairman McHenry. I think he's a good chairman. We started the session, the Congress, identifying 3 or 4 bipartisan major issues that we could work together on, digital assets, of course, being among the top. Today we have a hearing in the Affordable Housing and Insurance Subcommittee. Well, it's the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee on their side. I wish it focused more on affordable housing. We have not yet had an affordable housing hearing in this Congress. And that just shows you the difference in the priorities between the parties. But it is unfortunate that because we don't have a speaker and Chairman McHenry is serving in this interim capacity, that has taken some of the focus off of the work that we could otherwise be doing. We've moved on a number of key policy issues around crypto, digital assets, regulatory reform. They have other bills dealing with reauthorizing the flood insurance program and other areas. But there are so many more priorities, from housing to helping small businesses get access to capital, which is really one of the big priorities that we have, and one of the roles that I think private capital plays in helping to build our economy and help to grow our economy.
All right. Well, you led me right into this, the topic of the day. So we're gonna go straight to that. First, I want to just set the kind of the scene here a little bit from the 100,000-foot level. You're in Nevada, key state in terms of the economy, what's happening. Would love for you to just kind of, what are you hearing from your constituents on the economy, on inflation, when you go back home?
Well, I was born and raised in Nevada in the district that I serve, and my district is 50,000 square miles, so it's half the state of Nevada. Yes, I have a part of Las Vegas, the thriving part of our state's economy, but I also represent central rural Nevada, and the counties I represent are really frontier communities that are struggling to develop economically. That's why we have a big focus on lithium mining in a portion of my district, which is incredibly important to not just our state's economic development, but to our nation's ability to have electric vehicles. You cannot get electric vehicles, folks, without lithium mining. And the largest deposit of lithium ore in the country, one of the largest, is in my district. In Las Vegas, of course, the big issues for small businesses, and Nevada has been among the top 3 states in the country for the number of new startups since 2020 and the pandemic. And that has been led primarily by women and women of color who are looking to invest in themselves, invest in their ideas and in their vision for starting businesses, but they're also looking for access to capital and opportunities to bid on contracts, both private and public, and helping to position them for a number of the new sectors in Nevada, including renewable energy around solar and geothermal and hydrogen, as well as really having the opportunity to be a part of our thriving economy. I focus on this a lot as a previous member of the Ways and Means Committee. I believe that when we work on policy, we need to make it more equitable and inclusive to all communities. I'm the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and a big part of our work is making sure that what we pass actually benefits every community and that we don't leave anyone behind.
I want to talk about the role private equity is playing in Nevada. I was doing some research last night, and it's actually pretty big in terms of numbers. The industry's invested $20.7 billion in Nevada in 2022, and nearly 8,500 jobs in your district are from PE-backed companies. Can you talk about the impact that investment has to your district and to the community?
Well, look, capital is king. I think it's like water in Nevada. It's for fighting. But truly, private firms, small business firms, major companies like our hotels have relied on the opportunities that private equity provides to help both sustain and grow our businesses in Nevada. And so I recognize the role that private equity and private capital plays in this moment, particularly with the tightening of access to credit, with the increase of interest rates that is a hardship, particularly on small business owners. And that's why, I'm pleased to be able to work with partners like the American Investment Council to make sure that, again, these opportunities are available to everyone. And that's a part of my job, is to make sure that we're connecting federal resources and federal partners with local small businesses. I'll give you a perfect example. I was just on the phone yesterday with a constituent. They are currently a small electrical firm. They got a small contract with our public utility to do installation for the charging stations at one of our malls. Well, in the course of that and being introduced to our public utility, they were bidding to be a part of Siemens and a part of a much larger opportunity to grow their business. But access to capital was their barrier in their ability to grow. And so making sure that we are intentional about bringing small businesses, startups, entrepreneurs into this space, connecting them to the people that have access to capital, and helping those businesses grow from small to medium to large should be our goal.
Yeah, let's drill down on that a little bit, because we've been hearing from small business owners, from companies that have got investment from PE companies over this past year, and one of the biggest concerns is that access to capital, right? Is inflation, is kind of figuring out how they're going to economically succeed when there's some belt tightening happening. What role does Congress play, right? When you hear this from your constituent, is it federal legislation? Is it making sure that there's not overregulation? How do you kind of answer the call there?
Well, it's all of it. We do have to set policy in place, and I believe that there's more effective ways that we could be doing that. For example, using our federal tax code to incentivize private capital in the places that we need it most, like rural America, like underserved communities, like new startups, and we've got legislation that focuses on those approaches. We do need regulatory guardrails, but we need regulators who also are not really setting their own agenda or going beyond what they need to be doing, particularly in this moment when, again, we're still recovering from the pandemic. Places like Nevada are growing economically, but we have to have access to capital to maintain that growth. The third, in my view, though, is also sessions like this, creating opportunities to connect small businesses and entrepreneurs with private capital firms and bringing those capital firms to places like Nevada so that we can connect the dots and help people see that there are avenues. I'm really pleased that through programs like the Minority Depository, MDIs, CDFIs, we've been able to create those opportunities in Nevada and in other communities across the country.
So as you mentioned, you're chair of the CBC. This summer, you also sent a letter to SEC Chair Gary Gensler asking the SEC to redo its economic analysis of the private fund advisor proposal, specifically talking about some concerns you had around minority-owned and women-owned firms. Talk about why you felt the need to kind of send him the letter and what's been the result of that.
Well, let me take a step back before I answer the specific question about the letter. So in this country, we have a wealth gap. And that wealth gap is growing between certain communities and communities of color. And by this, I mean we have the opportunity to close the wealth gap by $1.5 trillion a year in the Black community alone, which would increase our GDP 4 to 6% a year if we helped to achieve parity just for Black America. If we did this across every community, we would grow the economy exponentially for everyone. By closing this wealth gap, and this is information that comes from the McKinsey Institute and their Institute on Black Economic Mobility, it would help create 600,000 new small businesses. It would bring about 30 million African Americans into the middle class. It would save over 3 million lives because health inequities would be overcome through economic mobility. And so at a time when we have regulators pushing rules that would actually harm access to capital to minority, women-owned firms, firms that are led by Black or Latino or Asian individuals, it actually goes against our goal of closing the wealth gap. And so not only did I send the letter to the regulator, I've talked to the White House, to the president, to the vice president, to their economic advisors to explain that we cannot achieve economic mobility and wealth and legacy and close this wealth gap if we have policy or regulations that are quelching our ability to do that. And in my view, the regulation in this case is a quelching effect on access to capital. And, it may be done by regulators that are appointed by this administration that I support, but I have an accountability to my constituents to do what's in their best interest, not what's being pushed by some regulator who may not understand the impact to the constituents that I serve.
So on that note, you go to the White House, you tell them a very compelling argument here. What was their reaction? So
they are listening. And part of what I did is I followed up with and let me connect you to the people who can explain to you the quelching effect of this. Yes, it's important to have advocates here in D.C., but let me also connect you to the small businesses and to others in my community who are already being harmed by their inability to get access to capital, and how this regulation could further impact their ability to have capital. Capital is king. Capital is what people need. Small businesses to hire people, to buy products, to buy supplies, to grow their businesses. As a small business owner myself, I've felt the struggle of being able to land a contract, but then not be able to fully service it because I didn't have access to capital. And those are the types of things that we have to course correct on in order to have more equitable economic policies that benefit every community.
When it comes to this, is there any role that you think Congress can actually have, though, or legislation that could help reverse this advisory opinion?
Well, yes, there is. But unfortunately, because of the environment that we're in and the divided Congress, and until we can get a speaker, we can't do anything in the House, right? So it comes back to the first question. We need a leader of the House who can work in a bipartisan way, because some of what needs to be done isn't going to be done simply by Republicans or by Democrats. It's going to be done by us working together. And I do hope that in this moment, with our challenges, both internationally, but here domestically, that we can leverage this moment that we are in, that we can come together and find common ground, as we say. And this is an area that I think that there should be more common ground to work on going forward.
Zoom out, just one more question here on the SEC, which is zoom out a little bit. We kind of went really detailed into this specific area, but how do you think the SEC has kind of handled private capital and the impact that it's having on minority communities? Is there something that you wish Mr. Gensler was more focused on when it comes to this?
Well, I've had the opportunity to speak to Chairman Gensler both in committee, in our forum, in our committee hearings, but also privately. And I'll just say this. I respect his career and his longevity of service, but I think that it's important that in this moment that we're in, that we're not adopting regulations based on what was happening 10 and 20 years ago. Our economy is dynamic. AI is dynamic. It's going to change the way work works in this country, right? And at a time when we have regulations that are being adopted, we need to make sure that they are taking into account the changing dynamics of our economy. So I need not just Chairman Gensler, but all regulators to understand that we need to be more equitable and we need to be inclusive, and sometimes their regulations have very real consequences. And they may be thinking they're going after this level of an industry, but meanwhile, they're impacting the mom and pop in my district, the business in rural Nevada that's just trying to get $100,000 to meet payroll, and a new startup that has a dream and an idea and an opportunity, but can't do it without access to capital. So let's think about the impact that these policies and regulations have throughout our ecosystem.
All right, we are almost out of time, but I can't let you go without a 2024 question. But I seriously, there could be 2 to 3 black women senators that after this next election. Can you talk about what that means, and do you see this as building some momentum into creating a more inclusive and diverse Senate?
Absolutely. Look, I can't be more happy as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. We now have 59 members, the largest in our history. When Gabe Amo wins in November, we'll be at 60 before the end of this year. With the appointment of Senator LaFonza Butler from California, we now have representation of black women in the United States Senate again. And as you indicated, with Lisa Blunt Rochester and Representative, or the next senator from Maryland, also Brooks. Hey, and I'm a true champion for Barbara Lee out in California. And so I believe that that speaks for itself. and each one of them brings a set of experiences, background, ability that is desperately needed, but most importantly, they bring a voice and a perspective that our country needs, not only in the United States Senate, but in the House. In the House, we are now over 56, we have 56 members. Collectively, in the CBC, we represent over 120 million Americans, 20 million Black Americans. We don't just represent Black community, we represent everybody because our districts are diverse, and the CBC now accounts for nearly a third of the House Democratic Caucus. So we are a strong and mighty caucus, and we're focused on one thing in the House. Hakeem Jeffries is Speaker, but we're also focused on creating economic prosperity and wealth and legacy for our communities and the communities that we serve. And private capital is an important component to achieving that economic prosperity that we want for everybody. Look, I say this in my district all the time. I want what everyone else wants in every other community. The opportunity to earn a good living, to provide for myself and my family, the opportunity to put my kids through school, to be able to have the security that I will be able to provide health care and security through retirement, and to build a legacy that is long-lasting for the next generation. That's what all of us want. And all of us can work towards building that economic prosperity by closing the wealth gap and creating more equitable and inclusive policies.
Mr. Horsford, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much this morning. We really appreciate it. All right, now I am going to welcome Drew Maloney, CEO of the American Investment Council, for a fireside chat. All right. Good morning. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning, Anna. How are you?
Well, you know, it's been a long, almost 20 days without a speaker, but you know, it keeps us busy. All right. I want to start here, kind of taking where the congressman left off about the impact of private equity and how it's kind of impacted his home state of Nevada. Particularly, he spoke about small businesses, which has been our focus this year in this series. What do you think is the biggest misconception about PE and small business? Because I don't think it's something that necessarily most people align kind of a direct, you know, or a dotted line to.
No, you're exactly right, Anna. I mean, one of the things that the American Investment Council we're trying to do is tell the story of private equity and the story of private capital and where they invest. And one of the challenges is I think a lot of people think it's only large companies that we invest in. But the fact is that 85% of private equity investments go to small businesses, you know, 500 employees or less. And the actual median size of a private equity investment in small business is 69 employees. I mean, it is really small. The other advantage is the average wage for a private equity-backed portfolio company is $80,000 a year. So they're well-paid jobs. They're investing in communities across America, and it's really a great story. And that's what we're trying to do at the American Investment Council, is tell that story.
So let's drill down a little bit there. There's been a bunch of success stories. I've been talking to different folks throughout this kind of year on panels like this. Give us an example or two of where you've seen private equity make that investment in small business and have a positive result?
So I'll give you two examples that are right here in Washington, D.C., and one is just a couple storefronts down. Sweet Greens and Cava. Everybody's probably been there at some point.
Two of Punchbowl News' favorite lunch spots on Capitol Hill.
Exactly. But you know, the idea behind Sweet Greens is you had two Georgetown students that were complaining that all they had was unhealthy food options living on campus. So what did they do is they invested in what was in, if some of you probably aren't as old as me, it was a little storefront called Little Tavern, and they converted it into Sweet Greens. So they went to local farmers and they, you know, started making salads. Now, at some point they wanted to grow that business, and they knew that they couldn't do it with their own capital. So they partnered with private capital in order to do that. And not only do they get the capital, but they get the expertise to figure out, okay, how do you build a better model? How do you do better marketing? How do you access different vendors out there? And, then after building that business and a very sustainable business that it was, it's now publicly traded on the market. It's more than $1 billion company. And then you just dial forward just recently, a couple months ago, Kava, another very similar story right here in Washington, D.C., did the same thing, and now their company is worth, I think, $3 billion as they took it public. But it's not only the access to capital, but it's also the access to people who have experience building a business. And that's, I think, what's important.
We've spoken before about the SEC and the role it's taken in the Biden administration. We just heard Mr. Horsford talk about his kind of issue in particular when it comes to the private fund advisors and the final rulemaking. You all are part of a lawsuit. Talk about why you decided to take that action and what you're hoping to have happen.
Yeah, well, thank you, Anna. I mean, I think Congressman Horsford's point is that we have to have right-sized regulations that encourage capital flow into the marketplace. Small businesses need access to capital, and as the credit markets tighten, we need to ensure that that access is available. So I think you saw sort of an unprecedented group of private fund associations join together to push back on the SEC. And the large reason is because this is a space that has really worked. I mean, we've invested an enormous amount of capital, and the investor returns have been better than the public markets over the last 20 years. And it's an area that is already regulated enough. And I think, as the congressman said, if you impose a new regulatory regime, it only makes access to capital more difficult. And I think that's what we're pushing back on, is that these small communities, these small businesses, everybody needs more access to capital.
And so the hope is that the court will find in your favor and that those rules will be kind of overturned?
Exactly, is that the courts will strike down based on a lack of authority to pursue what the SEC is doing. And we can continue to do the lending that we do. We can continue to invest in the businesses the way we do. And the pensioners that are investing in private equity funds will continue to receive the returns that they have over the past 20 years.
So small businesses we've been talking to across the country over this past year, they often share this concern about access to capital, right? That maybe banks sometimes don't have the right, aren't the right vehicle for them. Can you share a bit about private credit? We talked about this the last time we were on stage, but talk about what it is, because I think sometimes not everybody necessarily kind of understands that.
Right. So at the American Investment Council, we represent about 2/3 of all the private credit assets out in America. And the way a private credit fund works, it's very similar to private equity. We get resources from pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, endowments. And we invest those over, maybe a 10-year period. And we invest largely in small businesses. I think the average size of a firm getting private credit capital is about 150 employees. And what we saw is growth in this post Dodd-Frank, when the regulators and the legislators decided that they didn't want the banks to take as much risk. Well, we all know, if you squeeze a tube of toothpaste, the toothpaste has to go somewhere. So people still needed access to capital. People still needed mortgages. People still needed car loans. So it created an environment where you had to go outside of the normal accesses to capital to get it. And that's what we do, is we provide a lot of these businesses that may be too risky for a bank to take on. We provide them capital. And I think it's a good reminder, I think the congressman sort of reiterated this, is that we have to be very careful on the regulatory regime. There's even a more onerous, Basel III regulatory regime that will require more capital on banks. That's just going to force more lending outside of the banking system, and make it harder for businesses to access capital. And that's not what we need to grow our economy.
We are quickly running out of time, but before I let you go, if there was one kind of tagline or thing that you wanted the folks here in the audience, online, we've got staffers here, we've got people from different industries, from small businesses, what's the message that you want to leave people with?
Look, America is the beacon for investment and innovation. And in order to keep that mantra that we have here, you have to make sure that the legislative and regulatory environment matches the economic output that we have. And I think just make sure you ensure that these regulations are right-sized so we can create as much access to capital and we can sustain and grow our businesses across America.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Drew, thank you so much. I appreciate it. A big thank you to the American Investment Council for partnering with us, for Mr. Horsford and his team for joining us this morning, and to all of you for joining us in person and on the live stream. We have a bunch of events coming up in November. You can check those out at punchbowl.news. Have a great day and stay safe, everybody.